just so our audience knows, you and I have actually talked already, and you're creating a podcast about, I'm not exactly sure what the scope of it is, but you can tell us about your podcast and then we'll dive back into your experience if that sounds okay.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. And sorry, it's a hijacked sharing group, but I'd really love to hear from everyone on this group as well. So I'd love if people would share, because I always find it really helpful, as I'm sure you all do, to hear other people's experiences. And I feel like it very much validates my own and challenges me to think about my own and what I can take from it and what it meant for me. Yeah, I've already had a conversation with Jan. Jan actually really helped me in try and work out a few things, because my near-death experience was in my head was really very recent. It was only coming up to 5.5 years ago. And I still find it confusing at points, and I think in a positive way, but also sometimes it makes me feel pressured about my life because of the experience I had. And then I work in the media, so I decided, well, I didn't just decide, it's something that's played on my mind for ever since I was critically ill and had my near-death experience, that I wanted to somehow share my experience to see if it was relative to other people. And that's how this project started. So I thought the best way to do it was create a podcast, because it protects people. It's, not necessarily visual, or it's not visual, and to hear people's stories and use it as a sharing experience. But then it's kind of turned into something where I wanted it to help us think about how we live our lives and how we approach death. So not necessarily what is after life, but more about what can we take from life after near death. And that was kind of where I've gone with this project and this podcast. And I find when I speak to different experiences, people that have had near death experiences, I find them really inspiring. And I find the transformation really intriguing and interesting. And I feel like in general, the population and as a society can take so much from people's experiences. And I just think it gives us a different approach in our lives, which is why I decided to make the podcast documentary that I've been making. So it's less so about what is life after death, or is there life after death? It's just more about what can we take in our lives from from people's experiences all over the world and through history. There's so many people that have had near-death experiences through generations, through ancient history, and can it influence how we live our lives and how we approach death in a less fearful way.
Mm-hmm. So how you can what you can take from near-death experiences and apply to living more fully and dealing with death in maybe a more peaceful way, something like that.
Because I'd be interested, like if anybody on this group wanted to, oh gosh, it's gone really dark, wanted to say, but everybody I've spoken to so far, I've interviewed quite a few people. I'm normally in your role, Jan. I've interviewed a lot of people that have had experiences and read a lot of people's experiences. And every single person so far has said to me that it's made them less fearful toward death. Every single person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I find really intriguing. What can we take from that in general?
Yeah. And that squares with research too, where we found that the single most frequent after effect, and it applies to more than 90% of near-death experiencers, is that they say they completely lose their fear of death. And that's because they found that the experience was, as one person said, it was like walking from this room into the next room. It was that natural. And then the knowing that consciousness continues, so there's nothing to fear in death. So yeah, it's a very common after effect. Yeah.
It's
And
also
then,
made me think differently about my own experience, which I'll talk to you about. But that's the other thing this has done, and I really feel like I'm a storyteller, like as in I work in media and we ultimately tell stories. But I think that storytelling is so important because it helps when you hear other people's stories. It helps you feel less alone, and it helps you work out what your experience meant, and it's made me see my experience as a lot more of a gift and a positive thing. And there was elements of it that I found distressing, but it's made me see those as a gift as well. And actually the distressing elements were positive ultimately. So it's definitely helped me interpret my experience, not interpret it, but kind of work it out. Work it out is probably the best way to say.
yeah, to understand it in a way that is helpful to you rather than just being stuck as a distressing kind of thing. Yeah. Now, are you looking for near-death experiencers for your podcast, or do you have enough now?
Yeah, potentially. We've have quite a lot of people, but I'm always really open if anybody really love to talk to more people, because I think the more variation of different types of people, the more people can relate to. So
Yeah.
I'm really, if anybody does want to
Okay.
speak to me about their own experience, and obviously it's not visual, so it's only capturing audio, voice, recording, and obviously we can not use the person's real name, because I also understand that there's certain feelings around speaking out, so
Yeah.
sensitive to that.
Yeah, that's okay. And if one of our listeners is a near-death experiencer, and and you haven't published your podcast yet, because you'll be publishing it at the end of the summer of 2022. If someone is listening to this before then and is interested in getting in touch with you, how would they reach you?
If they could maybe reach out to IANDS, to you, so
Okay.
that
Yes.
if that's possible to,
Sure.
or they can contact me. I mean, you can find me on social media, like my Instagram is just my name, Charlie Webster, and you can always send me a DM. Or yeah, if they could potentially go through you, because they'll already have your contact details through IANDS, and
Okay.
then
Yeah, that sounds good. So if they can find you on social media through Charlie Webster, and it's CHARLIE Webster, or me at jan.holden@unt.edu. Okay, good. So we've taken care of that. Now we can get to your experience. So, Charlie, tell us who you were leading up to your near-death experience. What was your general history in life? Consolidated as much as possible. And at the time of your near-death experience, leading up to it, what were your major values and goals in life?
gosh, that's a big question. So I was living in the UK. I'm now living in the States. And I was working in media, as I still do. I worked on television and radio. Also did a lot of advocacy work for certain, well, basically issues around domestic and sexual abuse. So I was really heavy in terms of campaigning, advocacy, and charity work, alongside and with young people and mental health, alongside my profession in journalism, broadcast, and working in television. I was living in London at the time, and I still kind of go back and forth now. And but I'm actually from the north of England, which is very different from London, if anybody knows England. And I was brought up in a very, very, as you would say, blue collar. We call it working class environment. So didn't really have a lot when I was in my upbringing, and came from quite a deprived background, and split family as well. So I definitely had some trauma in my background through domestic abuse and through split family. And I was a runner as well as a teenager, so is in athletics. So I used to run track with a running group in the north of England. So I'm very, very physical, which plays a big part in my near-death experience. So I'm a very physical person. I always have been. You know, my granddad used to take me hiking from a very young age. At the age of 5, he would walk me like 7 or 8 miles. Yeah, it was a very, very young age with my little legs. And so again, yeah, just a very physical person, always played a lot of sport. You know, my mum always did aerobics and was walking us everywhere. We didn't have a car. So I was part of a athletics track club in the north of England when I was a teenager, and I hope it's okay to say this, so there is a trigger warning that comes with it. So I'm about to talk about sexual abuse. If anybody wants to log off for a minute or just pause for a minute. I won't go into any detail, but just to say that I was groomed and sexually abused by my running coach as a teenager. Again, it does play a part in my near-death experience. And my coach did go to prison when I was 19 years old. And so to paint a bit of a picture, that I had quite a chaotic upbringing, and with that came certain mental health difficulties. So I was quite depressed when I was younger, and did self-harm as a teenager. And yeah, so I think that it's important to paint a picture of that for me. But then I did really well in my career. I suppose I was, and still can be, an overachiever, which I think is a great thing, but also means that sometimes it's hard to know when to see that something is well done, because you constantly are striving and nothing's ever good enough. That's what I was like, to an extreme when I was younger. And I think I found relationships quite difficult because I was very guarded, and was always focused on achieving and career, and a lot of it came through survival. Again, without having a safety net when I was younger, it created I can only rely on me. And with that comes a heavy pressure of not feeling that safety. So that's what I felt a lot when I was younger. And again, like, part of that was I did a lot of really full-on endurance physical activities. So I'd run marathons, I'd go and do an Ironman. I ran 250 miles down England to raise money for charity. And so that leads me to what happened to me. So I actually cycled 3,000 miles from the UK, London, to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And that's actually where I ended up falling critically ill, and ended up in a hospital in Brazil, which is a very long story. I actually did do the whole cycle ride. Again, that's my my mum would say, my mum once said, which I think captures what my personality was like, and still can be a bit like, but I've definitely had quite a change, and this was all through my near-death experience. But my mum, this is a good way, I think, to describe me. When I ran the 250 miles, my mum was concerned, and she's speaking to her friends about it, and her friend said, well, what's the worst that can happen? She can just stop and not complete it. And my mum said, you don't know my daughter. That's the problem. She won't stop. She'd rather die than stop. And that's where I worry, because she doesn't have the filter or whatever it is. And that's what I was very much like. So, and again, when I cycled to Rio, I was doing it for charity. I would have done anything to push through to make sure I succeeded and completed the challenge. So I think it's important to give a bit of all that flavor background, and there's so much to it. And I think I managed to do it in 5 minutes, which is unbelievable for me because there's so much. But I think that paints a good picture. But I was also somebody who was very striving and very put a lot of pressure on myself, but also people were really important to me, and I think I was kind, but probably very guarded, as I mentioned. And intimate relationships were always, I always found quite threatening. So even though I did have them, they weren't necessarily very healthy relationships because of probably the people that I would pick on purpose so that I wouldn't have that attachment, and also then probably my own. And the reason I'm saying this is something that's changed in me, and probably my own the way I was raised and the lack of trust I had in people. And also I always was so like, well, as long as I only have to rely on me, then everything's fine. So then when I had to rely on other people or other people, you know, it caused so much conflict in me because I thought I was always going to get let down and that person was going to hurt me. And that was because I had a lot of unresolved trauma.
Great. What a great succinct description of your whole psyche leading up to your medical crisis. So yeah, and I think, and you did start into the next question, which is, so then what did happen that the kind of physical circumstances surrounding your near-death experience?
So as I mentioned, I cycled, very physical person. So I cycled from London to Rio for charity. This wasn't like a set challenge. It was something we made up. There was 4 of us that did it, but 3 of us completed the whole thing. And I was with all men, so I was the only woman that completed it. And it was really hard, as you can imagine. To give you an idea, there was at one point where I was cycling through Brazil that I started to fall asleep on my bike while I was cycling about 30 miles an hour because I was so tired that my body was still going like this, but my, kind of doing the hand signal of wheels, but I was just so tired, so my brain was almost switching off. And so dehydrated and not having enough food and taking enough food for the amount of calories I was expending because of the amount of activity. Anyway, arrived in Rio, which was our final mile. So the final mile was the very top of Christ Redeemer. I don't know whether anybody's ever been to Rio or seen pictures. There's a really famous mountain with Christ on the top. And it's what all the pictures are that you ever see of Rio. And so we cycled to the very top of that, and that was our finish line almost. And we had the Brazilian flag, we had the Union Jack because I'm British, and I'm also from a county called Yorkshire, which has its own flag. So we had all these kind of flags, and it was around the time of the 2016 Olympics. So there was loads of tourists. I remember a Japanese TV station were at the top of Christ Redeemer, and they interviewed me on Japanese TV, and it was a really surreal experience. And I remember I remember it's really interesting because I was raised in an atheist background, and I remember seeing this big Christ in front of me on the top of the hill of Christ Redeemer, and having cycled all that way for 5 weeks non-stop. And I remember all these clouds, and it was a really magical moment, but something didn't feel right for me in that moment. And my gosh, my life changed within a click of a finger in 24 hours. So that day, I did something, just, when something doesn't feel right, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And so I had to do I did a lot of press because it was in the public eye, what I was doing. And also we were trying to raise as much money as we could for charity for underprivileged children, mainly in the area that I was raised. And did all these interviews. I never forget being in one of the studios in Rio, and I was just in the bathroom, in the toilet, in the restroom, and I was like, oh God, I feel so ill. And I was just sat in the bathroom, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, what's going on? My stomach hurts. And And then, you know, came out of the bathroom, and then the camera was on me to go live, and straight away stood up, put the face on and smiling. Anyway, within 24 hours, I was in so much pain and felt so ill that I couldn't even stand up. I was kind of hunched and bent over. And I was actually meant to be working in Rio on the Olympics. But again, it's a very long story, but I ended up going to the doctors, and I'm not from Brazil, so I had to put my credit cards down and try and get somebody to help me. I was like, please, somebody help me, somebody help me. And at that point, I was really not in a great way. And I went to the opening ceremony of the Olympics because I was working on it, and ended up collapsing in the toilets. And sorry to be graphic, but I had like blood in my nose, my ears, my mouth, my you know, under
Bum.
bum. Yes, thank you. I was like, what word can I use that's polite? And then 24 hours after that, I was rushed into intensive care. I was told to my face that I was dying, and I was told that I had multiple organ failure, and yeah, that I was dying, and my body was dying, and that I was going to die. That's what I was told. And you can imagine, like, that's why the physical side to paint that picture is so important, because I was 33 at the time. So I was young, vibrant, really fit, really fit. I mean, I just cycled 3,000 miles. So I was so strong, fit, very physical, very active, very strong mentally, hugely resilient type person. And then I was stripped raw. I was absolutely in the most vulnerable state ever. And I've been through a lot in my young life already. And I was, you know, to have the doctor say that to me was, I was just jaw stricken. My jaw just dropped. Like, I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I'm dying. What? Anyway, and I've never been in a hospital in my life. That's the first time I've ever been into a hospital, and I've ever had anything like properly wrong with me like that anyway. So then my mum was called, and she was told that I'd got 24 hours to live, and that she had to get straight away to Brazil to see me. So then I was, by the time she arrived, my lungs had collapsed. I was struggling to breathe. And they very quickly had to put me in a coma. They put me in an induced coma, and then my lungs stopped breathing and I stopped breathing. So they had to put me on life support machine, and my kidneys have failed. So they had to put me on a dialysis machine. And initially they didn't have a dialysis machine available. So it was all very complicated. So I was in a really critical condition, and doctors didn't think I was going to survive. They also thought that there was a long period of time where I had oxygen deprivation, and they also, I had brain hemorrhaging, so they thought I was brain damaged. And so they said to my mum that even if I did, there was a very slim chance that I would come out of this. And at the time, they didn't know what was wrong with me. And yeah, they said to my mum that if I did come out of it, and there was a very, very slim chance, that I wouldn't be the same again, and that I would be, you know, disabled in some way, mentally and physically.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So what do you actually remember in terms of the physical circumstances? And then what do you remember in terms of your near-death experience?
So in terms of the physical circumstances, I was in a lot of pain. I was distressed. I was fighting. I was really, really fighting. And that's one of the things the doctors said, is one of the reasons why they think I'm alive, but then it also caused a lot of distress because I was pulling things. They were trying to, you know, they were anesthetizing me and putting me in a coma, but I was trying to fight it because I was desperate, to survive. And I think I saw my mom very briefly before I went in the coma, and we just looked at each other, and that stays with me, and it stayed with me when I was in the coma, because her the pain and upset I could see in her eyes, and she put on a brave face because we kind of looked at each other as in like, don't, just don't, because we'll both just break. And at the time, you know, I was really struggling anyway to breathe and was in a very bad way. So she, you know, she's stuck in my head the whole time. And so I actually remember being in the coma, and I remember some conversations that happened, actual conversations that happened around me. Like my brother came over and flew over, and I remember him and my mum talking, and they were bickering, you know, typical family stuff about the rucksack and the water and who'd brought what and blah blah blah. And I remember that whole conversation. I remember a conversation that like another person who I was working with at the time, he flew over, and I remember him telling me something about my mom, and like I'm in, you know, and I remember, and they thought I couldn't hear anything. They thought I wasn't there. They, you know, they thought I had all these brain electrodes on my head because they thought that I wasn't there anymore. They thought I was brain damaged. And by the way, what I had, I should mention, was 4 different tropical diseases. So I had malaria, a rare form of malaria, which had basically consumed and eaten all my red blood cells, you know, and that was also in my brain. I had hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is also something that kind of takes all, because I had to have a lot of blood transfusions. And then I had Shigella, which is a bacterial disease, and chikungunya, which is also a parasite disease. So, yeah, I'm basically the queen of diseases. So I didn't just have one; I had everything, which is like typical me. It's like, if you're going to do something, do it properly. Don't do it half. So I don't forget to tell you that. So my physicality was, I could feel things, I could hear things, but I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed. So they actually did fully paralyze me, which I feel like there was times where I tried to move and I tried to communicate and I couldn't. So I think some of the trauma of that experience comes from that, because there's a thing called like locked in, where you're locked in syndrome in a coma, and I had that. Yeah. But also it's interesting because I battle with that, because it gave me a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder after, and a lot of flashbacks. I got a lot of flashbacks afterwards, and nightmares. But at the same time, the doctors really feel that because I was there and I was aware of the situation I was in, that I really fought. And this comes to my near-death experience because I really feel like I did. Mm-hmm. So then I remember, the first thing I remember is not being, so I couldn't see myself. So I know some people say I couldn't see my body or myself, but I wasn't on the bed anymore. I was like, so I was in this big room, and in the intensive care unit, and my bed was slightly to the left of the room and the door was slightly to the right. And I remember being near the door in the room. So like, but obviously you should see pictures of me. I was the pictures are kind of horrible because I have a tube in my mouth. I look like I'm not there anymore. I have my eyes closed. I have brain electrodes. I've like got tubes everywhere. Like, you wouldn't recognize me, and I'm in a coma. But so that was my physicalness and my brain. And one of the things I always say is like, what I find, what's really challenged me a lot about my experience is that the way I felt more alive than ever. So, but yeah, I was physically not there anymore. And I actually
like your consciousness was separated from your body, but you didn't actually like look back and see your body. You just experienced yourself located away from where your body was.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that's when you felt so alive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I felt like my brain was so alert, which is ironic because they thought I was brain damaged and I wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So whether it's my brain, my mind, my soul, my spirit, whatever we want to call it, for me, it's just me. Like I was me, the me that was talking to you. Like my mind, my awareness, my emotions, my heart was so heightened. They were more alive than I am right now speaking to you. And it was almost like they were hyper vigilant, overactive, like the most highest adrenaline you could imagine. That's almost what it felt like to me. And physically, I should make sure I mention that I was in a coma for about 2 weeks. And in my notes, it said that I say the phrase because I think it gives a context of how bad I was. It says that I was aggressively resuscitated. So I also, stopped breathing and my heart stopped. And the doctor said that my heart was so strong because of all the physical activity, which is, again, another lesson maybe to take from it, because it makes me think about how important it is to be physically healthy to be able to fight disease. But to me, my mental and my mind and my soul and my spirit, whatever, my heart, whatever we want to describe it, plays a huge role. So in my near-death experience, which at the time I had no idea what a near-death experience was, I'd never in my head, maybe I'd heard it in culture and film, but I'd never heard that word. And I'd never even thought, to be honest, I'd never thought of death ever. Like I've only had my two of my grandparents, my nana and my granddad, pass away at that point. So I'm from a really young family, like not that always makes a difference, but death had never been a thing. It's never something that was discussed. I've never really, like I said, the only real grief was my granddad, the granddad that used to take me hiking. And obviously my nana, but my granddad passed first, and he was the first person that had ever really died, and never really thought about anything other than, just life, really. And obviously the grief I suffered with him, but never in terms of the context of death. It was more the loss of him in my own life, so in a selfish way. And so anyway, I was at the other side of the room, but I couldn't see myself. All I could see was in front of me. And in front of me was a mat, like I call it a mass, an MASS. So for people that aren't used to my accent, mass, as in like a black thing in front of me. And I describe it as a mass because I don't know how else to describe it. It was dark black, and it kind of did have a form, but just not a person form. It just was like this, like a cloud almost, but dark, that was in front of me. But it was a presence, it was something or somebody. And at the time I thought it was death that was stood in front of me. And it was so nothing. It was like, the way I describe it is as if we were having a conversation about who's going to get the milk from the store. Like there was no emotion. There was no, like, I wasn't scared. There was no fear. It was just nonchalant. It was like, oh, hey, do you want to come with me? He didn't say, do you want to get milk? But like, it was that, do you want to go and get the milk from the shop, from the store? It was just like that normal conversation. Or do you want a coffee? Do you want a cup of tea? And I say he because to me it felt male. It felt like it was male. And he said to me, oh, come with me. Just come with me. Come with me. It was just like passive. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, come with me. And then there was these two little boys that were old men. So bear with me. They looked like little boys, but they were old in their skin and their face. So they were sized like boys. And they had like Lego hair. So like a Lego figure, that the hair is just like stuck on, and it's so perfect because it's like spray painted. It was like that. And they were like telling me to come with them, and they were at the door of the room, and they were like, come with us. And that did scare me, because I was like, who are these? This is weird. This is really freaky. But it didn't feel like it just felt like, as I talked to you, it just felt like it just felt like I'm having a conversation with you. It wasn't like, oh, blink, oh no, they're not there anymore. Like, and they were there, and I was having this conversation, and it was very real, and it still feels like that to me today. And so anyway, this dark thing in front of me said, oh, you've got to come with us. And I was like, I don't understand. What do you mean? And he was like, you've got to come with us, you know, come with me, and started to like pull me through the door. And also it wasn't like he was talking to me, but it wasn't like I could see his lips or anything. It just was telling me this, and I could hear his voice, but it was like a presence, and it was like a feeling, like I could feel the pull. So it was like pulling me, like as an energy out of the door to go with them, out of my hospital room door. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I just thought to myself, so I'm dying then, I'm dead then. Like, and again, it was just really just like I'm describing it now. It wasn't like, oh my God, it was like, oh. And then in that very moment, I just wanted to go, because I was in pain. I was exhausted emotionally, mainly. So this isn't physically. I was emotionally in pain. I was emotionally exhausted. I just wanted peace, and I wanted quiet, and I'd had enough, and I felt like I'd had enough of fighting. And not just in that moment in the hospital, but just in my life in general. I just felt like, you know, when you just feel like it's just too much. And that's what I felt in that moment. And it was
almost like you want to just surrender.
Yeah, surrender. That's a great word. I just wanted to surrender. Like I fight, like I'm a fighter personality. I fought a lot in my young life as soon as I was born. My mum was a teenager when she had me. She was 15, and it was a fight as soon as I was born to survive. So I felt in that moment that I'm done, and I surrender, and it's all peaceful, and I just want to be in peace. Thank you very much. You know, goodbye. But that didn't last very long. That lasted for a split. Well, there was no time to me, but that felt like it didn't last very long. It felt like a moment, a thought. And as that thought happened, the pull was really strong. So I was like moving out of the room. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of like, bam, like this. I was in what seemed like my funeral. And it was a really bright white room. It was so bright that I can't even describe it. It was like bright white, brighter than the whites that we ever see, that I've ever seen. And everything gleamed, but only white, like almost like it was so white that it was transparent. And I was at the very back of the room, and I could only see the backs of people's heads. The only people I really remember is I saw my nana and granddad, my grandparents who I mentioned, but and they're very dear to me. I lived with them several times in my life, so they also were a big part of raising me, and very close to them. Especially my granddad was like a father figure to me, and they wouldn't turn around. I could only see their backs of their heads, and I wanted them to turn around, and I wanted to speak to them, and they wouldn't speak to me. They would not speak to me, and I was like, oh, am I dead then? Am I with you both? But again, I didn't see their faces. So it was, you know, and I kind of was like annoyed that they wouldn't speak to me. And then all of a sudden it flashed into like where my mum was in the front of this room, but I was right at the back. And she was so distressed, and she was so upset. And all of a sudden I could kind of see in her eyes, and I could see like the emotion and how much pain she was in, and I almost saw her heart shatter. And she has suffered a lot of pain in her life, and it makes me, you see, this is why my experience is so emotional, because it plays such a big part for me. So my mom, as you know, she suffered a lot in her life, and what hit me was that ultimately I've always felt like me and my mum protect each other, and I was even her protector from a very young age. And she says that if she hadn't have had me, I always felt bad that she had me because she was a teenager, but she always says that if she hadn't have had me, she would have either ended up in prison or dead. So like, she sees me as somebody who kind of saved her. And you know, we have that complicated, intertwined, sometimes healthy, sometimes not healthy relationship where it can be a bit codependent emotionally. Yeah, because I feel like I also am her carer and protector. I mean, emotionally, I'm not talking, she's very young and physically great. And I don't know whether anybody can relate with those kind of relationships, sometimes parental relationships where the roles get mixed up. So I tended to be the parent a lot of the time. So in that moment, I was in the most emotional pain I've ever been in my life, because it hit me that I was going to be the person that ultimately destroyed my mum's life. And she said to me, like, this is way after, she said, I don't know whether I would have been able to survive without, if you'd have not survived. And in that moment, something so powerful hit me, where I was like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I am not going with you. And all of a sudden I was back in front of the dark mass by the door. So I was not at that really bright funeral, which was somewhere else. Like, I felt like I was somewhere else in that moment. And it wasn't like I was just looking at it. I was actually in this bright white void space, and whatever we want to call it. And then this mass in front of me, I said, no, I've not fought this hard. And these were my exact words. I've not fought this hard to leave now. What was the point? What was the point of me even being here in the first place? Like, you know, it was never meant to end now. Like, I've got so much more to do. And all these things kind of kept spilling out of my mouth. Like, what about my mom? Like, I can't do this to my mom. Like, I'm not going to leave. And then I've got brothers, and then my brothers came to my head. And again, like, I'm very protective over my younger brothers. And so all these things came into my head about, like, you know, why I shouldn't go. And I felt so powerful, where I was like, no, absolutely not. And from feeling like emotionally exhausted and this feeling of like, oh, peace and surrender, to this strongest fight ever. And it was interesting because the mass then got more powerful, and it started to argue against me and was like, no, you got to come with me. You got to come with me. You got to come with me. And I then found myself almost justifying why I shouldn't go, and how much more I still felt like I had to live in my life. And in that moment, I was and it made me think a lot, because I have had, you know, depression in my life. I have had suicidal thoughts when I was younger, that in that moment, I was so alive, yet I was dead. I was physically dead, but I was so alive in that moment, and I desperately, desperately wanted to live. Like, oh my gosh, if I could just capture that fight and in every day, it'd be amazing if I could bottle that moment. Because for me it was so strong, and this mass was like, no, and it kept arguing against me, and then it got more powerful. But the more powerful it got, the more powerful I became in my will to live. And then with this kind of argument, it wasn't an argument as in like, it was just like I was just forceful, and it was forceful back at me. So it was more like I was like, no, and it was like, come on. And I was like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And this whole conversation happened between us again. Like, I could relate it word for word 5.5 years on. And then finally I was like, no. And it was all driven really by that moment of seeing my mum's heartache. And then, and that was it. And then I was back in myself. And the next thing I remember is starting to come out of the coma, and my first words to my brother, actually, it was my brother that was there, and my mother was there as well. And that was that. And it's funny because when now I'm telling it you, I didn't really share it with my close friends and family, and I've shared it more in the last 2 months than I've ever shared it, because I've been making this podcast documentary, and even sharing with you now and everyone on here, it's actually inspiring to me and hopeful. Whereas I think sometimes I remember sharing it with a friend, and my friend's comment, bless her, because she's amazing and a wonderful friend, but she was like, oh, that's actually really scary. And it made me really concerned, because I didn't want to scare people or make people scared. And I think because like my whole experience was mixed up as one big distressing trauma, because I nearly lost my life, so, but I think when I try and separate them to the distress of nearly losing my life, and also when I came out of the coma, it wasn't simple. It took me ages to recover. I had to relearn how to walk again. I did have problems with association of words, with speech, with my brain. Like I couldn't see properly. My kidneys weren't working for a long time, so I had a lot of problems, which you can imagine what that was like for me, being somebody so physical, that really dominated my life. And like I had post-traumatic stress disorder after, and I had mental health problems. I felt quite depressed afterwards, and it really challenged me, because I fought so hard to live, and then I felt depressed afterwards. And a lot of people said to me, oh, you're so lucky to be alive. You're so lucky to be alive. And in that time, I just felt in shock all the time. And people were saying that to me, and I was like, oh my God, but I am. But then internally, I just feel so confused. And I felt like I was confused about my identity. But I think that was key in my transformation.
Okay. Wow. So you, in your experience, you first experienced this sense of surrender, and then experienced this sense of absolute defiance, not to let yourself die. And then paradoxically, once you did survive, and then had to face all the physical challenges of having been so seriously ill, then it's almost like you temporarily lost the thread of that defiance, and were overcome with the challenges of the recovery, and felt paradoxically depressed. Yeah.
One of the things I missed out was actually really important. One of the things I missed out was when I was in that moment, I didn't have a like I've heard of like people that have had a life review. I didn't have well, it depends what we describe as a life review. I did have certain moments flash back in my life in that time. So, and they were all traumatic moments. They were all, and I feel like I know why now. They were all moments of two significant traumas. So my home life, which was abusive, and my coach. And the reason why I said those in the beginning is because my abuse by my coach, because both of those moments, and they weren't just a moment, they were over a period of time, but just for the want of description, they both came to me and real moments of vulnerability in my past life, in that moment of my vulnerability. And I believe the reason why, because I think this might be your question, I'll answer it, is so a lot of that did really impact my life before I fell ill. It really did. But I didn't realize it. I thought I was leaving a past behind. I thought I was like a strong survivor, and I was not influenced by what happened to me. But I was so wrong. But I'm also really grateful that I had that attitude, because it helped me survive, and it helped me really succeed and get myself in an independent position, which is what I think helped create safety for me. But at the same time, what it did was it stopped me from receiving love. It stopped me from feeling cared for. So ultimately, the feelings that I always felt when I was younger were always there. My feelings when I was younger were always felt very lonely. I felt, you know, like I wasn't enough. I wasn't good enough. And I felt, you know, neglected and rejected quite a lot. And those feelings were always there, no matter how much I succeeded, no matter how much I achieved, they were always there. And it's because I never dealt with them. And I really feel that, like, the reason why all those the memories that, you know, I've had good times in my life, but I feel like when I had my near-death experience, what came up for me was all traumatic, but it was because I needed to deal with it for me to be able to be free and live my life. So that's why I feel, anyway.
Yeah. So in a way, the ways that you dealt with your traumas enabled you to survive, but not thrive, not really live fully. The
Yeah.
ways, the strategies you used kept you alive, but also kept you in some ways cut off from
Yeah.
your own feelings, other people's love, and a lot of potentially good things.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're implying that it's hard for you to imagine how you could have gotten out of that mindset. That was your whole mindset for these like 33 years. It's hard for you to imagine how you could have gotten out of it if it weren't for the force of the what you encountered in your near-death experience, that having those experiences come back to you in such a raw, direct form, you had to it had to be that like, I don't know, direct or something for to enable you to escape
Yeah.
from the mindset that you had.
Yeah. So the way, like to me, I was, you know, and it's still a work in progress. But I mean, I could never have spoken like this 6 years ago. I would have just been, or I could have, but from a distance. I could have done it, but as if I was telling somebody else's story, because I found it really hard to connect to my emotions. So I would, you know, make a joke about something that's so serious to protect my emotion, because I couldn't access it because I was in too much emotional pain. So I was like, had so many steel layers around me, and use a key word, like I was a survivor. I could survive anything. I guarantee it. That doesn't mean I was happy and I was okay. I could just survive. Like I'm great in a chaotic survival situation, because that's what I'm used to, and it almost clicks in with me because that's what my life was like when I was younger. So when I'm in a safety situation, that makes me more nervous. It used to make me more nervous. And a safety situation is relationships, right? Is care, is comfort. And that would make me more nervous because I thought something was going to happen. So, or I'd be hurt. And I think a lot of people, you know, I don't know whether on this group, but I think a lot of people who've been through things, like we're humans, relate to that. Like, it's kind of our survival mechanism, but also our survival isn't, you can survive day-to-day trauma, but if you're not in a traumatic situation, those mechanisms aren't healthy because they actually prevent you from thriving. And that's what I realized. But I don't know what else it would have taken, because I had so many still walls around me that I almost feel like I had to be stripped to my most vulnerable state to be able for it to click for me, because it absolutely didn't. And I you know, I was aware, and I was emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent, like, but there's a difference between that and connecting it with your own emotion and behavior. And that's what changed for me after, because I saw that those trauma and there were certain moments that it wasn't like I just saw them. I was back there, and I was that child again.
You relived it.
Yeah, and I relived it. I was there again, and it was awful. But I needed to relive it, because yeah, I really feel that, like, I don't know what it would have taken. I don't think it would have taken. I don't know what would have taken for me to deal with stuff, because I just didn't. And stripping me raw and having that experience and really connecting with my emotion like that, and not having you know, I couldn't go and take myself out of the situation. This is what I always used to do. I'd take myself out of the situation, or I would go and do something physical. That's why I tell the physical side of me, because that was always my coping mechanism. I would go for a run. I would go to the gym. I would do something physical so I wouldn't have to connect with my emotion. Lying in a coma, having an near-death experience, you don't have a choice. Like, I couldn't run away from it, which is what I do. I couldn't fight, which is what I do. And I couldn't go and do something physical to cope with it. I couldn't go and, you know, party or drink or whatever to go and take my pain away. I was forced to face it. And a lot of that is through also the relationship with my mom, which is why I feel like my mom played a big part, because afterwards I you know, and I spoke to you about this previously, because like, it's really hard, because what happened to me was, you know, it was horrible to be in that position. Like, you know, and I'm sure many people can relate that have been in situations where, physical situations, you know, where it's just horrible. Like, and I was in a lot of physical pain, and it was really scary. Like, I was really frightened of the physical, not the near-death experience, the physical situation. But at the same time, and I don't wish that on anyone, and I don't want to ever go through it again, but at the same time, like, and I'm talking not the near-death experience, I'm talking the physical, you know, having tropical diseases and being, you know, having your organs fail is horrible and frightening. And, you know, I was on my own initially, and I was told I was going to die. And, you know, I was in a foreign country as well, where people didn't speak my language, and this was being communicated to me in broken English. But at the same time, what happened afterwards was I realized I needed help. So, and not just help where, oh, I'll just see a counselor for one session. And what do they know? They don't know anything. Because I did go and see a counselor once, and I just was like, whatever. Like, and the psychologist I ended up going to see almost described me as too, like, I mean this in a humble way, because I'm definitely not, but almost like too intelligent. So I'd just block it, and I could question people back, and I could, you know, I remember seeing the psychologist for the first time, and she was like, stop asking me questions, stop deflecting all the time. And that's, you know, I'm good at that. And also, it's part of my job. Like, I work in broadcast and journalism. That's what we do. And I became very good at that. And that's because it became a defense mechanism for me. But what my near-death experience made me realize is that I needed help, and I needed to deal with my life and what I'd gone through. And I did. And it was the best thing that I ever did, because it's helped me access my trauma and my emotions that are attached to that. And it's helped me understand the feelings that I'm left with as an adult, and that those feelings I have aren't the reflection of my adult life. They're from my past childhood. And it's really important for me to help, you know, because I still get, you know, and I think I'll always have depression, but I can live really well with my depression. Whereas when I was younger, I couldn't, because I didn't understand it. I thought it was just me. There was something wrong with me. You know, and my emotions were all over the place. You know, and I'm talking anger and frustration, but I couldn't even recognize the anger because I couldn't access my emotions, like, you know, and I'd just go and thrash my body. And I remember the psychologist saying to me that if I hadn't have got help, I probably would have died another way, because of the way I pushed myself so much, because I had such little self-care. And what it taught me, being so in that situation, was to care for myself and love myself and know that I'm good enough. But that only happened because I went and got help for everything that I'd gone through. And yeah, so I actually ended up, like, in that awful situation. But then having that near-death experience, and it made me realize how much I wanted to live and how important my life was and how much I got to give. So yeah, I don't know whether that translates, or I'm kind of trying to describe it, because it set me free, and it helped me. Like, my friends say there's change in me since, is that I'm a lot softer. So I'm softer, and I'm more, you can get to know me better, and like I'm more open, and which is what
you're more available.
Yeah, available.
Emotionally. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, I didn't say anything right there because I just wanted to dwell in that moment of you coming to this most fundamental conclusion that you need to take care of yourself, and you're worth, you're worth nurturing and loving yourself, and you have a lot to give, and that just seems like such a realization to just dwell in for a moment, and just really embrace, especially after the long journey that you've been on to get to that point. It seems like a really important point. And so, just to summarize, your near-death experience, what you experienced in your NDE, didn't like resolve the traumas. It somehow brought you face to face with them in a way that you could no longer use just the coping mechanisms you'd use to avoid them.
Yeah.
And opened you to the possibility of going to therapy with really like kind of a right mind about approaching therapy in a genuine seeking kind of way.
I really believe that, like, I wasn't, and again, I want people to hopefully take peace from it, because I feel like, I remember when I started to wake up, I was like, I said, I met death. Like, that's how I described it. I was like, because I didn't know what a near-death experience was, and I'd never heard of anything like that. And I was like, oh my God. And I was so, just as if I met you, I was like, I actually met death. And I really believe that I was meant to be here, and that was all for a reason, to show me like my value, and it wasn't like, I knew, like, when I was going through the physical side of things and in recovery, I knew that I needed to sort those things out that would play to me. And I'm not, and it wasn't because, it was almost like seeing those back, but it wasn't just seeing them back. It was it was connecting me with how it was making me feel, and forcing me to feel those things, and almost showing me that how much I wanted to live, and how much I wanted to give, and that's what I think made me go, right, I need to sort it, I need to change this and help myself.
And I think what your friend was maybe reacting to was the pain of and having those feelings again, and the pain that you went through even in therapy of addressing all that in a new way. And it was, I'm sure there was pain involved in the process, but it's kind of like, if you've got something wrong with you physically and you have to have surgery, that's going to be painful, but in the end, you're going to be healthy and maybe better than you ever were before. That's what's really important. Yeah. What's important is the end product, and not it's kind of like, I've heard people say, I haven't had children, but I've heard people say that, as painful as labor is, it's pretty much forgotten after it's over and you've got the baby, and, and it's all good. And it's sort of like that. It was kind of like a labor process, and you but what was being born was you, the full you, the you that you had the potential to be.
Yeah.
And it was just the labor, just the labor pains of that process.
And I think it would never have, and I remember we talked about this, it would never have had an impact on me if I hadn't have felt that emotion. It wouldn't. So I feel like whatever anybody believes, whatever it was, showed me that because it needed it for me to have that impact on me, to feel that. Otherwise it would never have changed anything for me if it had been, and I feel like it was it had to show me those things, and I hope I'm making sense. And I think that, again, it would never have, like, I needed to mend, but I couldn't mend if I couldn't access the broken pieces. So I couldn't, and that was the thing, I couldn't access the broken pieces, so I couldn't mend them. So what it did was it helped me access the broken pieces so I could mend them.
So it was ultimately a very benevolent, there was like a very benevolent motive behind all this for you to be able to mend. And the encounter with the broken pieces, as painful as it was, isn't the whole story. That's only part of the big picture of the whole thing that was going on, which was your coming into the fullness of yourself.
But it was very, and again, I said this a few times, but I don't know whether anybody can relate. But initially it was, kind of went on this journey, and then, and I remember writing about my near-death experience almost as soon as I could write again. When I was out of hospital, I was in hospital for a long time, many months. But when I came out of hospital and I was, I was with my mom, and she was helping take care of me. Initially, that's when I couldn't walk and, wash my own hair and things like that. I wrote it all down. I wrote everything that happened because it was so striking in my head. It was in my head all the time. So I wrote it all. About what it was like, my experience, what I saw, the conversation, like everything. I wrote it word for word of exactly what happened, and because it was so striking.
And this was all before you knew about near-death experience.
I didn't know anything. I didn't Google anything. I didn't. It was only probably about 2-3 years later that I was actually telling somebody that they hadn't seen me since it happened. And I remember being in New York, and I was telling somebody about it, and they were like, "Oh my God, so you had a near-death experience?" And I was like, well, I suppose. And then that's when I started to go in and look at it. But it was always already having such an impact in my life, because by that time I was already full scale in with a clinical psychologist, for several years. I didn't just go and have like a couple of sessions. Like I worked with her for 2 years and was part of a group. Then that led me to a group, which is a specific trauma group. And so I really went through it, and then came out of the other end. And then again, like, it's kind of led me here because it's made me think so much. Initially it was like, well, what is there after life? And then initially that was kind of the question I posed myself, and was like, what is it? What is there? What do I believe? What do people believe? Has anybody proven anything? And then I realized that I kind of wasn't really that, I didn't really care, because it was my experience. And actually what I found was, what is so significant about my experience is how it's helped me and how I view my life. And that's what I've noticed about loads of people's experiences, that as long as we can take, I find that people believe lots of different things. So if we can all just take heart and hope from something, then, and it can help us live more in the present of what we want to do and ourselves, and giving ourselves a break. Like, we're so harsh on ourselves and horrible to ourselves sometimes, and put so much pressure on ourselves. Well, I certainly can be, and was definitely. So I think then I went on this journey of, like, because I questioned it all the time. It was in my head. And then, you know, I felt embarrassed about it as well. And like, because I told a few people and they laughed and, you know, like, oh, you're just in your own head. It was just, you know, the drugs or that I was on, that was being pumped full of, you know, it was just hallucination. You're just whatever. But, well, if it was, then how can it just have such an significant impact on my life then?
Yeah.
But to me, it, you know, I don't, again, you know, I don't know what anybody believes on here, but I think it doesn't matter because it's your own experience and it happened, and it's more about what we can take from it. And that's what almost I've kind of come to the acceptance and resolution of, because I think I had so many questions about it. And to start with, I think I kind of was like, oh my God, what
Yeah.
that? And then I questioned it myself, like, oh, well, did I imagine it? You know, and then, you know, because you start, you know, again, it's like, it's, I think, human nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially in a culture like ours where it is so common to encounter disbelief and discounting of experiences like this. This is part of why I'm so interested in the phenomenon of veridical perception in near-death experiences, which I don't know that there's any element of your NDE that involves this, but in some people's NDEs, they perceive things in the material world and or the transmaterial domain that based on everything that they can perceive and know and all that, they shouldn't be able to know this, and yet it's later shown to be accurate. And there's a book called The Self Does Not Die, which is a compilation of over 100 cases of verified paranormal phenomena during NDEs. And the reason I'm so interested in them is because those experiences where there's some element that can be verified about what the person experienced in an objective way point then to your experience and experiences like yours where it may not be a specific verifiable component being just as real as those that have an objectively provable aspect to them. And then it argues against people discounting and dismissing these experiences and really being able to get past those ideas that, oh, you were just hallucinating, blah, 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 and really be able to get to what's the value of this experience, you know, how is it helping the individual? How could it maybe even help humanity? So, yeah. Well, one thing that we haven't gone into quite as much, we've talked about the after effect in terms of your transformation regarding all the traumas of your earlier life. Any other after effects, any other changes in you psychologically, spiritually, physically, socially, that you attribute specifically to the near-death experience?
I think so. Spiritually, I feel, and I'm always reluctant to say it because I don't want it to, I don't really know, probably because I'm trying to maybe get more comfortable with myself, but I really believe that, and again, I was raised in an atheist background, but I really believe that God saved me and I was meant to be here. And the reason why I say that is because I had so many people praying for me, and again, I was never brought up in, and you know, whatever we want God to be. So I'm not talking about specific religion but I had so many people, so much energy and so much prayer and so many. I didn't obviously know until after I was told all over the world that were praying for me, and I think that, I don't know, there's something in that, and I feel that I'm here for a reason, and I feel like I've got purpose. And
and
yeah.
that the purpose has something to do with service of some
Yeah.
sort. Yeah.
I feel so. And actually, since I've already, I made a documentary last year about sexual abuse that already has changed national and international policy.
Wow.
So, and I've done a few other things along those lines. Like I helped influence a bill that was passed in the UK in government, and there was a loophole in the law that was really causing a lot of damage to victims, and so I pushed the loophole to be changed. So I feel like I find like sometimes I still find it difficult to say those things because I'm just like, oh yeah. Anyway, I don't know
Yeah.
why.
You
Maybe it's a British thing, but also like I think it's kind of what I'm like as well. Like
Mhm.
I still,
You have more humility.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I do look back and I think, wow, I've actually, if I hadn't have survived, like I feel like I've had a service impact, and I really hope even in doing this, talking to you today, or the
Mhm.
podcast documentary I'm making, I hope it helps somebody. And I don't want it to just help one person. I'd like it to have an impact wider, obviously one person is very important, but
Yeah.
I hope that it would help other people, maybe give comfort, or whether it's somebody who's experienced a near-death experience, or whether somebody's experienced trauma or mental health. Because what intrigues me is like, for people that haven't had a near-death experience, what can we take
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
near-death experiences?
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and because I think it's like the transformation side of things really intrigues me. So I
Mhm.
think from a spiritual point of view, it's made me more connected to myself and my purpose with life. It's helped me manage and live with who I am and my mental health and my past, and kind of connected me to be more as one. Whereas I think I used to feel like I was two people. Now I feel like I'm more one person. And that is so peaceful, because being two people is really hard.
Yeah.
So I think it's brought me a lot of peace, because it's connected these two conflicting people inside myself more, to be more in unison and as one. My family dynamic has changed significantly. I won't go into it, but my mum has well, she left her abusive partner after, so that was like huge significant impact after, and I really don't feel that would have happened otherwise. I really don't. And so that, I feel like she's set free, and with it my wider family, because of what happened to me. And I know that's maybe not necessarily, you said directly my near-death experience, but I really do think it is,
Mhm. Mhm.
because it was all tied up in that, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe it also was there to set my mum free too.
Mm.
And so a lot of it's very emotional, very spiritual side of things. I think, I'm just trying to think what else. A lot of it's very much that, and I think I'm still trying to get my head around it, because also like a lot of people's experiences that I've read or that I've interviewed. And by the way, what I also did was, as I said, I wrote my experience down, and I also recorded my friend interviewed me about my experience before I'd actually ever spoken to anybody who'd had a near-death experience. And I kind of did that on purpose, because one, I didn't want to be influenced by what people said, but I also wanted to show that this was just whatever I'd experienced, and I'd not spoke to anybody.
Mhm.
But I do, so going back to what I was saying, but I do know that a lot of people talk about it maybe 10, 15 years later. So it's really intrigued me, because like I said, it's just over 5 years for me. So I'm intrigued to see like how much, because it seems so alive in people still, that I'm intrigued to see like where it will carry on and the progression, because it's so significant in my life. And I think also feeling more open to talk about it, because I get very defensive sometimes if people don't, I've tried to sort of feel it out, and then if I get shut down, I find that very difficult, because it's like somebody shutting me down. So I think having a safe space is really amazing, to speak, although I'm doing something where I'm attempting to show it publicly, but anyway, that'll be interesting. Yeah, and I think that they're the main changes really in me, is very much emotional, very much purposeful, and all connected to my family.
Yeah, wow, those are huge. They're, very, so many really big things have come out of it, really profound things. Yeah. I remember we talked about electromagnetic things. Have you had any electromagnetic after effects?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because like I thought about that, and so I don't wear a watch.
Did you used to?
Not on and off, and not really, but
Not much, yeah.
yeah, so I don't know, because I don't wear things like that, so I think I might wear a watch just out of interest, because I have heard, again, I didn't know that, I just heard it through interviewing people who had watches stop on them and certain things.
Right.
But it's interesting, because I don't know whether I didn't know any of those things, so even if they have happened, I probably would never attest it to my near-death experience. So I don't actually know.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of things I think I feel like I'm really deeply empathetic, which is something that I think is really, I think I did have strong empathy before, but it's like so
Exponentially bigger.
strong. Yeah, that was the other thing. I was just trying to think if there's anything else, but that was something I must forget to tell you. Like, I feel, very and much, really very strong empathy, which I do think is a really gift actually, because I think it can make you feel a lot more, but I think it is a gift.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because it, going back to that theme of walls versus connection, empathy is a very powerful connection process between people, and it conveys safety, that if you empathize with me, then I know I'm safe with you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's a very connecting kind of thing. So,
And actually, there's two other things I was just thinking. That one is like almost reading people. So I feel like I can get an energy from somebody, and I listen to it, and I like either, I get an energy in immediately, and if it's, I'll pick up on like negative energy, and I don't mean it as in like, oh, they've got negative energy. I mean as in bad, as in like that person I don't want to go near. And I've had that a lot since, where I just, and then the other thing is like a peaceful strength, if that works. So as in like I'm here, and I'm meant to be here, and there's something really strong in that and peaceful, because I feel like that was there for a reason for me, and actually I don't fear things really moving forward, or fear death, or anything like that. I just feel like a knowing, a peaceful knowing that's surrounded by a lot of strength. But I think I was strong before, but my strength was always survival and erratic. Whereas this is more of a knowing strength. It's like a strength at one inside yourself that, whereas before it was probably a very fearful strength.
Yeah, right. It used to be a reactive strength. You were reacting against being vulnerable, as opposed to having a fundamental sense of strength and power, in a way. Yeah. And I'm struck also by how before your NDE, you were doing service things like, your charity work and all that stuff. But again, it seemed like it was coming out of a compensatory, like you were trying to compensate for something or fight against something, as opposed to your service now seems to be out of a love to give something.
Yeah.
And it seems like it just has a different motivational feel to it, like a fundamental motivational feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can't even
Wow.
expand on that because you're exactly right. It
Hmm.
feels different for me too.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Before it was probably um to try and we have a saying in England, like with a chip on your shoulder.
Hmm.
You have to say,
Hmm.
yeah. So like I felt like it was probably with a bit of an anger chip on my shoulder to prove something.
Hmm.
And came out of like feeling repressed maybe, and
Hmm.
and feeling that pain of other people who were also repressed. But now
Hmm.
it doesn't come out of that. It
Hmm.
comes out of
Hmm.
a place of love and care,
Yeah.
and not out of anger.
Yeah.
That's probably
Yeah.
the difference.
Oh. So I'm curious, and then after this, if anyone, I just want to remind, we have a few people who came on after the very beginning and didn't hear this, but if you have questions for Charlie, you can put them in the chat, and Pete will ask them. And I'm going to ask this last question and then shut up so other people can
Yeah, I'd love for other
ask.
people to share because I know this is a sharing group and
Yeah,
it's all being about
anyone
me.
wants
So
to share,
I'd love
yeah.
to be
Okay.
quiet and let everybody else
Mhm.
come in.
So right now in our world, we got the situation with Russia attacking Ukraine, and I'm just curious with your NDE perspective, how do you think about a situation like that?
Oh gosh. I think what the people of Ukraine, and especially like today as we're talking, there was a lot of casualties for women and children and a lot of suffering. And I think, there's no way that we can try and justify or put a spin on that. Like
Mhm.
it's horrific. But I do really believe that something better will come out of it. Um,
Mhm.
it's probably the way I
Mhm.
would
Mhm.
I would think about it.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes something, and I mean it's awful because you can never. You're like, oh, something's better is going to come out of that because people have lost lost their loved ones, but also lost their safety and their home,
Yeah.
which a
Yeah.
lot of us can't
Yeah.
ever imagine.
Hmm.
And imagine us having to force to flee and leave everything.
Yeah.
But I do believe there's a lot of hope in that, and look at the incredible love of the neighboring countries and the acceptance which was probably very divisive before. I mean, I'm from Europe, so I know there's a lot of division between the countries within Europe. So I feel like it's really showing how the
Brought
world is
people
bringing together. So I think, like, I suppose that's what
together.
what I said when I said, a lot of good can come out of this and it can be better, is that connection, especially recently. The last couple of years, there's been so much divisiveness. And, it's incredible to see people on all the bordering nations. I mean, people are traveling to the borders to offer their homes. So, which is just really humanity, right?
Yeah.
But it's sad that it takes something like this sometimes for us to be like that.
Yeah, yeah. And, when I think about, uh, I agree with everything you've just said. And also I think a lot about Putin and people like him and how someone can have such a lack of empathy for others and perpetrate what he has. But your experience, even though it wasn't, anything like perpetrating this kind of stuff, the fact that there was this steel,
Mm.
steel thing around you, that it took nothing short of this, your near-death experience, um, to be able to move beyond. It gives me, it helps me understand how someone like Putin can be like he is, that that as as thick as the steel was around you, it's got to be 10 times thicker around him, for heaven only knows why.
And
And
it makes me think of a phrase that I really do believe in, and I think I can say this as somebody who, I can't remotely relate to Putin, but there's a phrase and I do believe it, but I think people don't maybe like to, to accept it. Like, hurt people do hurt.
Mhm,
I really do believe that. And like I really believe that perpetration comes out of deep pain and trauma and insecurity and
mhm,
lack of safety.
mhm,
And
mhm.
I'm not saying
Yeah.
that's it's no justification for anybody's actions, but that's ultimately what perpetrator behavior comes from. That's why it's so important to heal
Mhm,
pain,
mhm,
because it can
mhm.
cause like
So much more
horrific
pain.
behaviors.
Yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah.
and it detaches you from your emotions, which is not a place you want to be, because our emotions are really important. Even
Mhm,
though that's hard, because emotions can feel like all sorts of things. But one of the most important things I was taught by a psychologist is that anger is an important emotion, and anger is just an emotion, not a behavior. It's what we choose to do with the anger.
mhm,
That's the behavior. And
mhm,
actually, anger is just as an important emotion as sadness, because it helps protect us,
mhm.
and happiness, because all those emotions are really important. And
Yeah,
when you're, you know, in pain, you shut them all off,
yeah, yeah.
and then
Mhm,
it's really hard to live when you
mhm.
shut off like that.
Yeah, to live effectively and and root truly constructively.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. So Pete, I'm gonna be quiet now and turn it over to you for questions or sharing that, if anyone has put anything in the chat.
There's nothing in the chat yet,
Okay,
but certainly if questions or comments show up there, we will
we'll
treat them.
address them. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Sharing groups.
while we're waiting, I do have a
Share.
couple of questions
Yeah,
myself
how about you, Pete? Go ahead.
Anybody
because
want to share though first, because I feel like
oh yeah, yes. Let me say that because this was a sharing group that we, as Jan said, we hijacked, and if there is some sharing that people want to engage in, this is the time that we can do it. Or if there are questions for Charlie. So,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, just let
just,
us know in the chat.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. And meanwhile, Pete, you said you have a couple questions.
Yeah. So I was made these notes as you were telling the story, Charlie, and I wanted to go back into to the experience as you described it and ask a couple of, I guess, some detail, but also some more information. You met death. That was the dark mass. Yes.
that's what I think. Yeah, I don't know whether it was
That's
an
yeah.
angel or something, but in that moment, like, this is obviously me reflecting back, but in that moment I thought, I I don't even know what death is, but I felt like I met death, because that's what I felt like I was going to die. So I feel like that's how I described that. But again, I don't know whether, because I have a tattoo on the back of my leg, which I got since my near death experience, and it's an angel, and it's what I feel was there with me at the time. And this vision, just, I didn't necessarily see it, but this vision was in my head for ages afterwards, and I was so obsessed with it that I got a tattoo with it
The
on the back.
vision of the angel.
Yeah, so I don't even know whether I feel like I met at the moment. I remember just being like, this is death in front of me, because I feel like he was taking me off to die, right? So that's why I feel like it was death. And when I came out of the coma, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know what had happened to me physically. Physically, I nearly died, but I was like, oh, I was there. I was about to go, like, and I feel like if I'd have said in that moment when I said to you that I felt this, oh, I've just this surrender and I was going to go with this mass, then I really believe if I'd have just gone, I would have died. But I don't feel like I was meant to. So I feel that's how because I don't want to say, oh yes, it was death, but that's just the situation. That's how I described it at the time. At the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I met death and I was about to go. Like, so yeah, but again, I don't know whether I also believe that I had, I don't know, I felt this thing that was also there giving me this amazing strength and power and protection. And then that's what I have tattooed on the back of my leg.
Okay. Well, when you said that you sensed from the dark mass and also the two diminutive old men, were they operating together? I mean, what were they agents of the mass or?
Yeah, it was all one. They were with the mass. Yeah.
They were with the mass.
Yeah, they were like just behind, being like, "Come on."
And they're saying, come on, come
Yeah, they
on,
were
come
like
on.
ushering me with their hands to come on.
But
Come with
you
us.
didn't. And would you call that, did you reject or defy or argue? What would you call the response that how would you characterize it?
I feel like an argument wouldn't quite, like I almost like, yes, I say it was initially a conversation, and where I felt like they were just taking me over, whatever it was, taking me with them. And
But you were saying no, or I don't want to, or
initially I nearly went, and I was like, okay. And then it was then when it clicked and I felt and I saw my mom's pain, and through what I see as what was my like a funeral, that's when it made me fight against the mass, and I felt kind of this power and protection, and that I was stronger than anything ever. That's what it felt like. It felt like this alive moment, and where I was just so alive. I was so strong. I was so powerful.
and that strength and power kind of it seemed to come almost instantly in response.
And it was nothing like I could ever. It's hard to describe it because it's not anything that I've experienced like in my day-to-day life. But yeah, and then I wouldn't say it was like, it was more of a, come with us, come with me, come with us, you've got to go, come on. And then it got stronger against me, and I got stronger as it got stronger. Or as the mass, or he got stronger. But I didn't feel like it was attacking me or scary. It was more me being like, no. It was more my own like battle with living. That's probably the best way. That was the anger in me. That was the fight in me against this death. So it wasn't necessarily arguing. It wasn't like an argument, like a person, like say if me and you had an argument. It wasn't necessarily like that. It was more, it was telling me and giving me instructions and, almost testing me to cross over.
And it elicited a fight response from you, though.
Yeah.
Like a defiance.
Yeah, defiance, but it was like all about my own life,
Yeah.
But, thank you. I just read the message from Debbie.
Yes, and I was going to ask you if you've heard. So Debbie has said that there are two places that she recommends that you might be able to speak as a guest speaker. And I wanted to ask if you'd heard of either the New Life Foundation in Portugal or the Rhythmia Life Advancement Center in Costa Rica.
I mean, also to give I've never done anything like this. Obviously I've spoken in my career about other things, but I've never, no, I've not, this is my first real connection into this. I didn't, like I said, the first time I've ever heard anybody else's experience was very recently, because I was interviewing people who've had experiences, and the first time I've ever really, it kind of hit me. I was like, oh God, oh my God, that's what I felt like, or that's what I saw, or that happened to me, but I didn't initially do that, so no. But thanks, Debbie, I haven't heard any of those, and yeah, this is really the first.
Well, and the interaction. So we have, you know, at IANDS, at ISCO, we have these sharing groups, not just like what we were going to do tonight, but there are meetings where people get together who are experiencers. And so it's that interaction between other experiencers, perhaps, that has helped you process what happened.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of the change that I knew I needed to, that was immediate. That wasn't through anybody else. That was like really immediate. But I think just be more open about, yeah, I suppose it like anything, it can feel a little bit isolating, right? Because you've had this, for me, I'm like, God, who can ever, like, that's something that I don't know if anybody can relate. I didn't know, but I do now. I didn't know anybody could relate to, and you're like, wow, how can you just carry on your day-to-day life, like, going to the store, making a cup of tea, doing normal, it's hard because you're like, whoa, I had this, what even was that? And then you're back to the day-to-day life. It's kind of strange. It's strange to deal with. You've got to try and get your head around that. Like, one, I nearly lost my life. Two, I had a near-death experience and felt like I met death and felt like I nearly went. And then, everybody else is getting on with their day-to-day lives, and you're like, what just happened to me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I want to say too, and I think I said this when you and I talked that last time, Charlie, that that moment you had at your funeral when you empathized with your mother and how her heart would be shattered if you died physically then. And that's the moment that you just shifted and became defiant about living. That is very characteristic. Not all near-death experiencers have it be part of their experience that there was a moment where they decided to live. But for those who do, I've never heard a case where it wasn't based on love for a living person. That the NDE empathized with a living person who was going to have a really hard physical life if the NDE didn't go back to physical life themselves. And when they empathize, and it isn't even that they make like a conscious decision, like they think, oh, my mother will be shattered, so I better go back. It's like this, the empathy with what pain they're going to experience is what causes the shift and the commitment to live.
Yeah. And also, like, my relationship with my mom is much better than it used to be.
Yeah.
As well. There's less, like, there's more understanding between us.
Wow.
And less, like, no, I think I felt a little bit of anger and resentment before, and that's changed.
Wow. Great. Another gift. So anything else, Pete? I didn't mean to interrupt your...
Well, actually, Charlie was just talking about, that led right into the next question that I had written down. You talked about coming out of the experience, how your relationship with your mom changed. And I wanted to ask more generally, have you noticed other relationships or the quality of your relationships in general with other people, either close ones or more acquaintances? Has there been a change in the quality of those relationships as well?
Yeah, definitely. And it just, when you were just speaking, then it got me thinking that my relationship group changed, and there was some toxic people in my life, and that immediately changed. And one of them was, I had a best friend at the time, a really best friend. We were really close. We never spoke again. And and she was really toxic, but I couldn't quite see it before, or if I did, I kind of made excuses for it and protected her. And it turned out my friendship group, nobody liked her. And yet she was my best friend for ages. So like my friends, the few toxic people that were in my life weren't in my life anymore. And my friendships and my relationships are much deeper, much more connected, much more equal. And I say equal because that's important, because I think that some of my friendships before would take a lot. But I also probably am to blame, because I probably wouldn't let them see that I needed to have them too, because I believe in any relationship you've got to have that equality where it's not just take. So I think that's really shifted for me, and they're just deeper and more connected and more personal and more like they're safer. They're safer. Like I have people I can trust and that I feel safe with, and I don't feel like I had that before. And these are the same people, the same people before. So I think it's clearly me that changed and allowed them to be the friends that they wanted to be, and the people that weren't really my friends straight out of my life.
There was something about that I wanted to ask about, but I can't remember it now. And here's the last thing that I wrote down. I'd like you to speak a little bit on the quality of the subject of healing as it relates to your journey here.
Yeah, healing's it's funny, isn't it? Because it's it's kind of a contradiction in terms, because it actually that situation where it tore me apart and my body apart, because my body was completely torn apart in every way. Like I was so violated physically with the illness, with being critically ill, and also with obviously the doctor saved my life, which I'm very grateful for, but also I had tubes everywhere, like in my legs, in my groin, in my neck. Like there was a complete, down my throat. Like, I was like, I had like tiny little marks on my groin and my neck. I had so many tubes in my neck. It was like, so there was so much physical violation, but there was so much healing mentally and emotionally and spiritually. Which to me is so significant. It's so important.
So almost like the appearance of all this violation misrepresented what was really going on at a deeper level. That there was this healing.
I felt like that emotionally before, but just nobody can see it, right? That's, I think, when we talk about mental health, that's part of the problem with us getting help, or even treatment seeking behavior. Sorry to use that kind of technical term, but like because you would seek help for something that we can see. So I think like it's an interesting juxtaposition, because you asked about healing, and there's been so much healing for me ever since my near-death experience, and funnily enough, like my physical, presumably you said about healing, Pete, you mean emotional and mental and spiritual, but at the same time, like I physically healed miraculously. And the doctors actually and consultants say that. They said it was a complete miracle that I survived. Not just in Brazil, but the UK doctors said it was a miracle. They actually used that phrase, not me. both sets of doctors, and they were looked after me independently. So the fact that they, you know, consultants said that medical professions, you know, something was definitely going on that's outside
Right.
of our
Well, that the healing
control.
perhaps on the spiritual and emotional levels actually
Yeah,
are reflected in the physical healing.
I think so. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so, absolutely. I think I really feel they're not just, you know, that our body and our physical and our mental and spiritual is not disconnected at all. They're completely as one. Um, but that's why it's really, I really believe that it did lead to kind of the physical healing as well. But I think, you know, and also I hope this is not controversial to say, but like, I also believe that what the things I've gone through will always be there. So when I say healing, it's not that those things don't exist anymore, but they help guide me, and there's
Mhm.
an acceptance. So to me, if I ever speak of healing, the most important word is an acceptance, because when we fight against the things that we've gone through and things that aren't very nice, that's when there's a conflict, and that's when there's no healing, and that's when there's only extended trauma and depression and anxiety and you know, all these things that come with it, and struggles and feelings of dejection and rejection. Like, that all comes from the battle
Mhm.
against the things. So to me, it's about acceptance, because if I hate against those things, I hate against a part of me.
Mhm.
And if I don't, you know, and or I want to wipe them out, I'm wiping out a part of me and a part of my life, and you can't do that. So the
Mhm.
most important thing I think about healing, and it doesn't mean it's okay. Acceptance doesn't mean it's okay. And acceptance is an acceptance that, you know, that you can't change those things. Like, I've been through those things. So and it was me that went through them, so I can't kind of like edit my life, because
No.
it's always going to be there ultimately at an emotional level. So for me, that's what healing is about, that acceptance. But I could only get that acceptance by facing those things that caused me low feelings or pain or lack of self-worth and not feeling good enough. So I think healing and acceptance is really important, that they go together.
Brilliant. I couldn't I couldn't have put those two thoughts together better. I don't think that
Mhm.
Thank you.
I agree. Yeah.
I'm
So
glad it's not just in my own head then. I'm glad it makes sense.
absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm noticing the time, and it's almost time for us to close. So I'm wondering, Charlie, if there's any last thing that that you want to say, anything that that um, that remains that you want to be sure to give voice to before we close tonight.
Just thanks for having me. Um,
Thank you.
you know, it's been a pleasure to get to know you as well, Jan, and also, you know, I'd love to, if anybody wants to speak down the line, like, I'd love to hear, you know, publicly or privately, like, you don't have to record things. But I think the one thing I would give, and again, I don't necessarily know who's here and what people's experiences are, but I think, like, we're all here for a reason. So I think there's some kind of connection, and for people listening. So for me, that it's like, being isolated in your experience can be lonely, and I think helping it grow and helping you learn from it, and know that other people have kind of been, you know, it's, everybody's different, everybody's had individual experiences, but you know, I've been there in some way, and understand, and I think knowing that people understand is important, because I
Mhm.
think when we feel isolated in our experiences, that's when it can be confusing,
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
where it doesn't have to be, because when we realize, oh well, yeah, I felt like that too, then it's, oh yeah, well, I feel that too, and so I'm not alone in that. So that's, I think, the most important thing I would say. And I felt great comfort from listening to other people share, and really inspired by listening to other people. I found everybody's experience, whether it's been like, you know, I think there's no positive and negative, because again, I felt like, I wonder if my, you know, I think I even said to you, Jan, you probably remember how I said it to you. I think I said, oh, you know, is it negative, my experience? Because I was like, you know, because I don't know, like, I was kind of like, does it have to be this, like, you know, amazing, peaceful thing? And I'm almost glad it wasn't, because that's not what I needed. Like, you know, gosh, like, so I think, you know, it was whatever is our own experience is for a reason.
Yeah, I agree. And it's almost like the, speaking of acceptance again, that being able to share and be understood and have someone who really resonates because it touches something from their own experience, it helps in the speaker's acceptance process. Like you said, if you hear a lot of dismissing, discounting, you can begin to question yourself and not even accept your own experience. And hearing that affirmation that there are other people who resonate with what you're describing can help you accept and then move past that whole issue of accept, reject, blah, blah, blah. If you accept it, then you can really begin to use it for your benefit and the benefit of humanity. So yeah. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking with you again, Charlie. I just really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody on here. Like, you know, I appreciate you listening and to me. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and best of luck with your podcast, your series that you're producing here. So we look forward to.
I'd love to
seeing more
share it with everyone, and I'd love anybody's thoughts. Hopefully it'll be a really interesting and inspiring listen. Yeah, that's what I hope.
Yeah, and when you do publish it, be sure to let us know, and we'll send out the information to our email reminder list.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for your support with it as well.
You bet. All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Bye.